us this morning after our technical problems staying with us. So I just want to welcome you all to our new series of Fireside Chats where from Weaver Labs, different member teams, we're going to kind of get into the camera and explain in this YouTube channel a little bit of what we do, the interesting people that we meet alongside our adventure, and get interesting chats about topics that are related to 5G, smart cities, blockchain, and many of the interesting things that we come across at Weaver Labs. So today, for our very first one, I am so lucky to have with me Raquel from Vivacity Labs and Sam from Transport for Greater Manchester. We've been working together a lot. We feel like we are all a big family on the Smart Junctions 5G project. I will let them explain a little bit more about their roles in the project, but so they are both driving the activity from Vivacity Labs and Transport for Greater Manchester. So Raquel, over to you to say a few words about yourself and what kind of brought us together.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Maria. Like Maria said, my name is Raquel Velasco. I'm head of product here at Vivacity, leading the commercial strategy for our Smart Junctions solution. So we, our kind of journey began about 3 years ago with TFGM as we partnered with them to develop. Yeah, I know it's been 3 years to develop the basically a different approach to traffic signal control and using machine learning to optimize traffic signals. So our main motivations for the 5G project were to kind of bring the benefits that 5G kind of promises into the realm of traffic signal control, see if we can actually translate those into improved performance for traffic network optimization, and to kind of get us all set up for kind of the next wave in smart cities technology and connected and autonomous vehicles. Sam, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly introduce myself as well. I'm Sam Lee. I'm one of the senior innovation officers at TFGM. Quick overview, the innovation team works like a pathfinder to the organization to look at future innovations, the opportunities, and kind of the risks it presents. So I basically get to work with great startups like Weaver Labs and Vivacity and meet cool people to work with, which is great. As Raquel mentioned, the Smart Junction project is those kind of key features that we're trying to understand in terms of the opportunity this sort of technology presents now and into the future, trying to future-proof our infrastructure for a change rather than leaving it for 20 years and then retrofitting it afterwards. But more importantly, I guess, is this future connectivity piece of what this 5G technology enables us to do that not necessarily able to do now, and start exploring the role a public sector authority needs to play in this. And I think we'll touch on a bit in the chat today.
Yes, we're going to talk a lot about that. I think it's quite an interesting piece because we see public sector having a more entrepreneurial role right now in terms of infrastructure ownership. They are being driving digital agenda for cities, which is great. So yeah, definitely we're going to talk more about that. Yeah, as I said, Vivacity and TFGM welcomed us into the family when this opportunity of plugging in 5G into the whole Smart Junctions product, the opportunity came up through the 5G Create DCMS program, and we all kind of decided that it would be a great way to explore not only how 5G could help install the sensors on the city and cut the costs for the installation with that kind of dig once approach, but also to explore the business models that can come after that with a public authority owning infrastructure and using that network for other use cases in the city, right? But let's just first concentrate a little bit more about what is Smart Junctions 5G and what was the motivation from specifically Vivacity. You own a product which is a sensor that it's installed in traffic lights and it's used to optimize traffic in the city, right? why you decided to try out 5G as a technology to connect the sensors?
Yeah, it's a great question because it really is kind of the next step on our journey for the developing the system. So the first thing when we kind of were laying out the architecture of the system, we realized that we were going to really need a low latency solution. So the first thing that we did was we thought we would wire up all of the sensors into kind of a centralized control hardware using Ethernet. And what we discovered was while that gave us, yes, this low latency way of connecting the sensor data to our control algorithm, it was extremely costly. We had to kind of retrofit junctions that didn't have sort of like Ethernet cables running from the cabinet on the side of the road up to the top of each of the signal heads. And so what we, out of kind of necessity, both cost and also just logistically speaking, we built a completely wireless solution. So right now we're controlling most of the junctions over 4G, which is, in terms of scalability and ease of rolling out, kind of a much better way of doing things. But what we have seen is that what we suffer from is sort of latency spikes and reliability issues as well. So at times when the network is most overloaded, when there are more cars on the road, when there are more people out, that's when we need the system to perform most optimally. And basically means that, 4G starts to, or public 4G especially, starts to really fail in that respect. And that's when we started to think about, well, what's the solution here? We can't go back to a really costly wired, like antiquated solution. So 5G was the kind of obvious next step to see about solving those challenges. And also it aligns with our kind of long-term strategy for connected and autonomous vehicles, how we play in that space, as 5G is quickly becoming the kind of de facto communication strategy for basically the connected vehicles trials in space. Yeah.
And Sam, why do you guys require a tool like Smart Junctions for the city?
Yeah. So I was going to add a little bit to that about kind of the connectivity piece, where Cal knows very well the quality of service 4G provides, and it's dropping out and various other challenges associated with it. That's why this really interesting, with the 5G architecture could change some of that to give us more consistency. I think there is a question from a TFGM point of view about where we're going next in terms of this processing. Are we talking about edge processing, or are we talking about kind of cloud-based processing with data? And there's a role for 5G to play in both. If we're starting to integrate the smart junction sensors in conjunction with things like air quality sensors, there's a really interesting kind of edge use case that can be developed to prioritize traffic signal using a few more parameters. But when we look at the cloud processing side, 5G can enable us to bring in other data sets that Vivacity might not necessarily have access to at that local level, to start managing the network as a whole. So this is the interesting aspect that we're trying to learn in terms of where the most value sits at the moment, and what are the kind of key factors we need to consider when we're rolling out that 5G network. Is it just latency? Is it bandwidth? What are the consideration we need to make in terms of prioritization of the connectivity and service?
And I guess for you guys, what is most important, you are taking on the role and responsibility on deciding what type of network it's going to be used to optimize the application that you want to bring into the citizens of Manchester. But at the end of the day, what you are interested in is in the data that it's extracted from the sensors and how it applies into the city, right? So Sam, what you were saying, right? How can you put all of this data together with other sensors and create this intelligent engine that it's constantly feeding into the city and providing other benefits, that it's not only like the productivity by optimizing the traffic lights using the sensors, right? And what I think it's important here is that we kind of look at the shared governance layer, right? So if we have different systems that are gathering data separated in silos, we are never going to be able to gather all of that data together and share it and make intelligent decisions. So from a city perspective, having a shared governance layer, a layer that it's able to gather all the information that it's being given from the transport network, from the police network, from the healthcare network, right? So, and that is something that at Weaver Labs we are bringing into the project, right? With the shared as marketplace with all the assets that everyone is putting together, we have a common pool where all this data can be managed by whoever accesses the network, right? So I would like also to touch a little bit upon we've talked a bit about why 5G, why smart junctions, and now I would like to go into a little bit why TFGM wants to own a network, right? And why are we deploying a network, a 5G network that it's private? So Raquel, you mentioned things like latency, reliability, and for our audience, I would like to just make the clarification. It's like the fact that when we have a public network, the one that we all access with our phones, what it happens is that when everyone accesses that network at the same time, all the devices that are connected to that network and have an application, they go into the queue because it's kind of like best effort. So what 5G is intended to do is have what it's so-called the network slicing, which is where we separate the flows and we kind of add different levels of priority to the different services. But then the other approach is that we have Transport for Greater Manchester as the user of this product to deploy a private 5G network where these services are going to be running. So you kind of do not depend on a service provider to give you that connectivity. Rather, you take on the responsibility of providing the connectivity for the products and services that you want for the city. So I would like Sam to give us an explanation of what are the current models. If imagine like we did not have the possibility of installing a private 5G network. So Raquel was saying we would use Ethernet networks. What if you did not own the network? What's the current model? How does it exist today?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many different kind of approaches, but the challenge comes back to control and kind of guaranteed level of service. So I think we just touch on a little bit with Raquel. Kind of implementation initially was look at 4G. That's one of the applications because it requires minimal civil engineering works. But once we start requiring that dependency, on consistency on the network and kind of fixed connectivity as a whole, we're talking about ADSL, fiber connection, and kind of quite a lot of heavy kind of civil requirement work to get some of these junction connected up. And I guess that's the core beauty of this smart junction kind of implementation, that we slowly move away from that to provide an easy way to plug and play, existing devices and new devices. And all we have to really worry about is power, as the core requirements moving forward. So I think that, the market itself is changing rapidly now in terms of more kind of this seamless connection, but it comes back to the level of control we want, as you say, Maria, and what that private network looks like. I think to expand on a little bit as well, at TFGM, from an innovation perspective, we're not looking at connectivity just about bus, trams, and trains anymore. It's digital connectivity as well. So how do we make sure people are both connected physically and digitally using these sort of new technologies and new kind of standards that are coming out?
Yeah.
Raquel, you want to add to that?
That's exactly right. I mean, one for us is to make sure that everything that we deploy is scalable as well, and applicable across multiple different geographies. And we're kind of proving out a model that we will hope to be able to replicate across the UK and other authorities as well. That's kind of the other key goal from our side.
That's a really interesting point, Raquel. So one of the main goals of this project is to demonstrate that a public authority can leverage capital funding of one application because it gives the business case to invest in an infrastructure such as smart junctions. In this case, the business case is justified through the improvement in productivity in the city. So you leverage that capital investment to invest in the infrastructure, put the 5G network in place, but then that network opens up a whole lot of other possibilities with other use cases that we are exploring, such as digital inclusion for households to get connected to the network, healthcare and many other use cases. So what we call the public sector use cases over public networks, which there are a lot of projects in the UK looking at that, right? We have Liverpool, Sunderland looking at how public sector use cases can be driven with a public sector owned network, right? And that's a really important aspect, because at the end of the day, it's where the investment it's coming from, and we need to justify that investment through at least one use case. And then there's the whole model that we are exploring and talking to other areas of the UK and also within Manchester, of how can public sector capture revenue from the existing network, right? So in the same way that there are some assets that are owned by private sector companies, and there is an investment that it's made for that infrastructure to be in place. The definition of value for public sector is way different than it is for private sector. But at the end of the day, how can we capture value through that network? It's something that it's coming up quite a lot in our research work. Sam, would you like to say a few words about that?
Yeah. So I think first thing to start off with, I'm going to quote Andy Burnham a little bit, that the time's coming where we need to see digital connectivity as a basic human right. I think he's right in that regard, and those public sector use cases are critical to make sure people are connected to access health services, to access future education, and make sure that connectivity is there to provide opportunities. Kind of coming back to the business model question that you're asking, Maria, I have to be very careful that we're not, generating revenue necessarily just to compete with other telcos and other kind of connectivity providers. But what we are trying to do is understand how to make solutions like this commercially sustainable, and for any revenue to be generated to be reinvested back into the ecosystem, either to enable more innovation to happen or to provide, the much needed connectivity to people that struggle from a digital connectivity poverty perspective. So yeah, that revenue generation model is particularly interesting to see how we can, one, reduce costs, as well as generating new funds to do the additional things with this network as a whole. And I think just to add is that the 5G kind of smart junction is kind of a starting point, a test bed where we'll create blueprints that we can replicate to the whole of the GM ecosystem as a whole. And it's a starting point of the journey. So I'm keen for anybody that has any questions and insight to reach out and challenge us with some of the thinking that we have.
Absolutely. And this is something you, Sam, and I do a lot, right? Challenges. Tell us what are the questions that you think are kind of like the building blocks of this, and how we can make it happen. One question that I wanted to ask you, Raquel, specifically as a company that builds an application that requires connectivity, what's your Christmas letter? What do you ask from a city when you go there with your product and you just want to make it work?
There's a lot that we ask for, obviously. We'd love you to have really terrible traffic that's easy to solve. That's like the first thing, right?
Good.
Yeah, I think as you said, we're a small company, and what we want to do is spend time and effort on what we do best, which is AI, machine learning, and like looking at optimizing traffic. So in terms of integration, we need it to be really easy to integrate. We don't want to spend a lot of time kind of changing data formats or kind of adapting our technology to whatever local the system is locally using. There's also an element of scalability, which I've already mentioned. Like our goal is to keep rolling this out, and that ease of integration is critical to us to be able to scale and kind of control a regional level, because just influencing traffic at one junction isn't going to make an impact across the entire city. And it plays back to that value point that Sam just mentioned. Where does our value come from? Our values comes from improving journeys for all road users. And so that requires, for us to justify the investment in our solution, we need to be able to demonstrate that based literally on minutes saved on the road. So from our side, it's a system that I've said, easy to integrate, but also we are talking about industries, from the telco side, as from the transportation side, that have these large incumbents that dominate and have created a lot of lock-in for cities. So, our wish list is actually to create a whole ecosystem where small companies can come in and easily just displace them. So I think it's really well positioned. This project that is one of its key goals here, is to create a network that promotes new entrants, promotes a very diverse supply chain, which was really attractive for us, because not only does it help us, scale, but it helps the kind of promote our ethos of, we don't think it should be nothing should really be dominated by a few players, and we don't want to tie the public sector's hands.
Yeah, I think just to add to that a little bit, Raquel, I think for us it's important that we become a smarter customer as well through these sort of engagement. I think that's a really important point to stress, that we've learned a lot working with yourselves as well as Maria, on the networking side. So if we are aware of the opportunities, it would help pick that market up as well, and competition drives new products, new innovation, and better services for customers like public sector, which, as you say, are traditionally tie into big long-term 10, 20 years contracts. So it's how we do things in a more agile way, because technology is changing so quickly, people's lifestyles changing so quickly. We need products and solutions that can adapt with the times.
That's great, guys, because I think it's where we fit in, right, with what Weaver Labs we bring into the project. What we intend to do is to solve all of these problems and make it seamless for applications to join the network in the city through the network as a service marketplace. And at a point that you, Raquel, made, which is not to tie the hands of the public sector, it's really important, right? There are many assets in the city, and we know, because we have surveyed everything that exists in that 1.5 kilometer stretch, right? And there's so many assets that exist, and we just have been months exploring where those assets are, how can we use them, how can we access them. So having a single repository of all of those assets, whoever it's owned, right? I mean, it can be owned by the private sector, it can be owned by the public sector. The point is to put them all together, and having an open and shared marketplace of infrastructure assets can help the discoverable, make them discoverable. So first, is there a backhaul network here? Is there a ducting here? Is there a traffic signal pole that I can use? Is there a cabinet that I can install equipment? What's the power of that cabinet? All of those questions that we have struggled to answer because there is no single repository of data, and putting all of that into an open and shared marketplace that anyone can access, right? So in the future that we envision, I think the three of us, is a new application coming into the city and just logging into a portal and saying, hey, this is my connectivity, and I don't have to talk to anyone because all the conversations are happening in the background through the platform that we are building together. So we're running out of time, but I would really, really want to get some questions from the audience that are coming up. And I think here, so Sam, you wanted to talk about the cybersecurity and the importance of cybersecurity. Yeah. So let's just touch upon that a little bit.
Yeah, so actually it's kind of a wider cross-sector piece. I think one thing I want to highlight from a public sector perspective is that we learned a lot around through this project, that it's not just within its isolation of connectivity. It links into various other things, as you touch on, like digital asset mapping. How do we better understand all the infrastructure around us? It's starting to get us to have the conversation around things like cybersecurity and the implications of either a private network that have, what are the architectures that we need to create to make sure new devices and new entrants like Vivacity and other players similar to them can easily plug their devices into that ecosystem while providing some level of assurance, right? That the data we're getting is accurate, it's not being tampered with, various other things. So that's a huge area that is relatively unknown at the moment, and it's making us actually a smarter customer again to start thinking, well, how do we position this? Do we need to include that sort of stuff in future tenders when we buy smart city sensors? How do we make Raquel's life easier, by saying these are the areas that we're focusing on, moving forward in terms of communication standards. So I think in GM cybersecurity will play a big role in terms of a lot of work moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's also it's worth to mention that it's something we are heavily looking at the project. How do we address cybersecurity in the supply chain, which I'm sure is a topic we are going to talk more about in coming conversations. But government is pushing quite a lot as well on cybersecurity, and also what you mentioned, Sam, in terms of the assets and how do we accelerate rollouts with digital connectivity infrastructure accelerator. So all of these areas that we are discussing are also areas that are quite important strategically from the UK perspective, and a lot of work is being put not only from our side but also from the larger community in digital connectivity and even the application, which is great because we are all working together to get this shared outcome, right? And for once, kind of like infrastructure and connectivity is not being seen as the one thing that it's there, but everyone in the community is contributing to make it work. So another question that it's coming up, it's how long will this be realistically adopted in cities, this model? And in reference to this 5G and the connectivity infrastructure, how do you guys see the timelines of this being adopted? Sam, you're on mute.
I was going to say, does Raquel want to go first, but I guess I'm going first now.
Because you were moving your mouth.
I can go. I can talk a little bit about it, but
yeah. First.
I can talk a little bit about 5G generally. I mean, we've seen a rollout of public 5G accelerating very quickly. I mean, we've just won a large project in the West Midlands where we're going to be rolling out 300 or almost 300 5G enabled sensors. And there's a lot of, the government, public sector is putting in a lot of effort into understanding 5G better, understanding the potential use cases and applications across a wide set of industries. And so I think public 5G is steamrolling ahead. It's very quickly becoming the de facto connectivity for kind of future cities and smart cities. All kind of IoT applications are essentially expected to be 5G compatible. So from my perspective, it is, the past year since we started, we've seen so much more movement in this space.
Yeah.
In terms of private 5G, it's probably more of a question for you guys than from our side.
I mean, it's a difficult one with 5G. I mean, we're talking about 5G now, but I suspect in a year or 2 years' time, it's 6G, 7G, whatever else that may be, right? I think from my perspective, it all comes back to the use cases that gets developed on top of that. And that's what we're trying to kind of explore through this project, is that what are the killer use cases, that can accelerate that rollout, that kind of justify the return on investment. And from my personal perspective, 5G could solve a lot of problem linking to kind of digital connectivity poverty right now for, areas that it's just not commercially viable to roll out fiber, and other kind of fixed line infrastructure. So there's definitely a huge opportunity in this. In terms of, do I have a magical date, in the crystal ball? I wish I do, because then I can make some investments. But I think it's going to become more and more common. I wouldn't be surprised if, based on some of the output from the DCMS kind of 5G program, the learnings that will come out of it by the end of next year would start dictating and informing some of the decision making and getting this rolled out. So in my mind, is that probably in the next 3 or 4 years, and especially with COVID, it's highlighted the importance of the digital connectivity for people to be working remotely, to access education and other services as a whole. So yeah, I suspect public sector will be really keen on providing better connectivity in the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, that's a great point to kind of like knit into the next question, which is what hurdles do you face in the UK and how regulations are making these solutions happen? And maybe I can express it from the perspective where we are seeing it. The digital poverty, it's something that has been very apparent now with COVID coming and everyone requiring connectivity, and the differences across the territory, right, in terms of accessibility of connectivity, and how like the responsibility of getting the connectivity everywhere is not only private sector, and that this responsibility is shared across the entire community and supply chain, which is something that we are seeing happening now. So I believe that is going to definitely accelerate where we are in where we want to be in the near future. And in terms of regulations, I think we all agree that the government is definitely helping drive this change with Ofcom having opening up spectrum for private network owners to use cellular technology, to having all these programs and being an instrumental role in terms of educating the whole market about the adoption and the benefits of 5G. You guys want to make any comments around regulation and how it has helped what you guys do?
Yeah, so I'll jump in a little bit here. I don't know whether or not help is the right word, because regulation means sometimes we have to adopt it and understand what it means from a public sector perspective. So just an example with the Ofcom electronic code, that's changed the emphasis on how telco access buildings and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it became an opportunity for us to understand what are the assets that we have that could help with the rollout, for their macro 5G network for telcos. So it's a back and forth with regulations, because in one hand, it gives a direction of travel. On the other hand, it potentially could limit the innovation and kind of the business models that comes out from all of this. But I think at this point with 5G, we're still in the early stages of really understanding what are the potential use cases. And I suspect, the regulation will change as that, development continues and the rollout accelerates. But that's why we're doing these trials, right? To generate the data and the insight, to really tailor those policies and regulations, and for that to feed into the next connectivity of that'll be coming along.
Great. So you guys, we can be talking for ages about this, and we are, we're a small family here. We've been talking about it for over time now. I think that maybe just closing remarks from Raquel, Sam, what you guys want to say something, and we just maybe run another live event to continue talking about all the other topics.
Raquel, you want to go first, and then I'll jump in with my piece.
I think from our side, we've just just super excited to continue this work. Partnering with Weaver Labs has been such a joy, really, to work with another company that is also early stage and sort of helping them in the ways that we've had to kind of some of the hurdles we've had to overcome with breaking into public sector and being a small company working, within this industry. Again, so thank you so much, Maria, for having us here and for working with us. And Sam, we're eternally grateful to Transport for Greater Manchester, always, for being our test bed and our
TFGM team, right?
TFGM team. Absolutely. For not only providing the feedback that we need, but also just the opportunity to innovate in such a great and dynamic sort of region. So.
No, I think the feeling's mutual, actually. I think that the one key point I want to get across, actually, is that if any public sector people listen to this kind of podcast as well, is the fact that don't be afraid to work at SMEs. Don't always think that you need to go to your big players like your Cisco, your BT, your Atos. SMEs have that spark and drive to create things and bring things forward, and develop stuff in a lot more agile manner to tailor to your need. And if any public sector partners, want to kind of understand how we've worked with SME, do get in touch. We're always willing to kind of help and support, and talk to you guys about the experience we've had with the likes of Weaver Labs and also Vivacity and what it means for us in the future. So, consider working with SME more is the key message I would take across, because they're not as scary as they look.
No, we're not. Do we look scary? We don't.
No.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a joy talking to you. We talk pretty much every day, but I think getting the message out there and explaining people what we're doing, it's quite important, because a lot of people share the same view, the same challenges, and maybe we've just helped someone understand a little bit better what we are working on, right? So, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for listening, and have a great day.
Bye.